Jake stared at the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen counter and let out a deep sigh. Living in the city was expensive, and his small studio apartment was eating up most of his paycheck each month. He worked long hours at a local electronics store, but it barely covered rent, food, and basic expenses. The cramped space felt even smaller when he realized he might have to move back in with his parents if things didn't improve soon. That's when his landlord knocked on his door with an interesting offer. The building was part of a cultural exchange program that helped international students find affordable housing in exchange for hosting someone. Jake could split his rent in half. It sounded too good to be true, but he was desperate enough to consider it. The student is very quiet and respectful, his landlord assured him. She's from Japan and just needs a place to stay while she learns about American culture. You'll barely notice she's there. Jake imagined someone who would keep to themselves, maybe study quietly in a corner, and leave him alone after work. He pictured someone who would sleep on the couch or maybe set up a small area near the window. What he didn't expect was what happened 3 days later. The knock on his door came at exactly 6 in the evening. When Jake opened it, he found a petite young woman with a bright smile and a single black suitcase. She bowed politely and introduced herself as Yuki from a small mountain village in Japan. Her English was careful but clear, and she thanked him repeatedly for welcoming her into his home. "I am very excited to learn American ways," she said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "My grandmother told me Americans are very kind to strangers." Jake helped her with her suitcase and showed her around the tiny apartment. There wasn't much to see: a small kitchen, a bathroom, and the main room that served as both living space and bedroom. He pointed to the couch and started to explain that she could sleep there. But Yuki was already walking toward his bed with a look of confusion. "Where do I put my sleeping mat?" she asked, looking around the area near his bed. Jake blinked. "Your sleeping mat." Yuki nodded and pulled a traditional Japanese futon from her suitcase. She began unrolling it right next to Jake's bed, measuring the space carefully to make sure both sleeping areas would fit comfortably. "Wait," Jake said, holding up his hands. "You don't have to sleep on the floor. The couch is actually pretty comfortable, or I could take the couch and you could have the bed." Yuki stopped what she was doing and looked at him with genuine surprise. "But we are roommates now." "Yes, in America, roommates share sleeping space for friendship and protection." She tilted her head, studying his face. "This is what I learned about American customs. We sleep near each other to build trust and make sure both people are safe at night." Jake opened his mouth to correct her, but something in her expression stopped him. She looked so earnest, so hopeful, and maybe a little nervous underneath her confident exterior. He realized she was far from home, in a completely different culture, trying her best to fit in and do the right thing. Plus, he was exhausted. It had been a long day at work, and he didn't have the energy to explain American sleeping arrangements or make her feel like she was doing something wrong on her very first night. And honestly, what harm could it do? The apartment was small anyway, and it wasn't like they'd be sharing the same bed. "Okay," he said finally. "If that's what you're comfortable with." Yuki's face lit up with relief and happiness. "Thank you for following proper American customs with me. I want to learn everything correctly." That first night was awkward in ways Jake hadn't expected. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every small sound Yuki made as she settled into her futon. She seemed completely relaxed, humming softly to herself as she arranged her few belongings in a neat pile beside her sleeping area. "Jake-san," she whispered in the darkness, "thank you for sharing your home with me. In my village, we believe that people who sleep in the same space become like family. I hope we can be good friends." Jake found himself smiling despite his nervousness. "Yeah, me too." As the minutes passed, Jake noticed something unexpected. Instead of feeling crowded or uncomfortable, he felt strangely at peace. For the past 6 months, he'd been coming home to complete silence, eating dinner alone, and falling asleep to the sounds of traffic and distant voices from other apartments. Now there was someone else here, someone breathing quietly nearby, Someone who had wished him good night like it mattered. Yuki's presence filled the empty spaces in more ways than one. Her small suitcase held surprisingly thoughtful items. A tiny plant that she placed on the windowsill, claiming it would bring good energy to their shared space. A set of delicate teacups that she arranged carefully on the kitchen counter. A few books written in Japanese that she stacked neatly beside her futon. The next morning, Jake woke up to the smell of tea brewing in his kitchen. Yuki was already awake, fully dressed, and had somehow managed to fold her futon so perfectly that it looked like a small decorative cushion beside his bed. "Good morning, Jake-san," she said cheerfully. "I made tea for both of us. In Japan, we believe starting the day with tea brings clarity to the mind." Jake usually grabbed a cup of coffee on his way to work, but he found himself sitting at his small table, sipping the warm, fragrant tea while Yuki told him about her plans for the day. She was going to explore the neighborhood, find the nearest library, and practice reading English signs. "Is there anything special I should know about American morning customs?" she asked seriously. Jake thought about his usual routine, rushing around, grabbing whatever food he could find, checking his phone while getting dressed. It suddenly seemed chaotic compared to this peaceful start to the day. "Not really," he said. "I think you're doing just fine." As Jake got ready for work, he noticed that Yuki was watching everything he did with careful attention, as if taking mental notes. When he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, she bowed again and wished him a good day at work. Walking to his job that morning, Jake realized that for the first time in months, he was actually looking forward to coming home. 3 weeks had passed since Yuki moved in, and Jake's life had changed in ways he never expected. What started as an awkward sleeping arrangement had somehow turned into the most peaceful routine he'd ever experienced. Every morning, he woke up to the gentle sound of Yuki moving quietly around the kitchen, preparing tea with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. She had different teas for different purposes, she explained. Green tea for energy in the morning, jasmine tea for relaxation in the evening, and a special herbal blend that her grandmother had taught her to make for clearing the mind of worries. Jake, who had survived on instant coffee and energy drinks for years, found himself actually enjoying these morning rituals. "In my village," Yuki told him one morning as she poured the steaming tea into their cups, "we believe that how you start your day decides how the whole day will go. If you begin with rushing and stress, the day will be full of problems. But if you begin with calm and gratitude, good things will follow." Jake had to admit she might be onto something. His usual morning routine involved hitting the snooze button 3 times, jumping out of bed in a panic, and running out the door with his shirt half buttoned. Now he found himself waking up naturally, sitting peacefully at his small table, and actually having conversations before facing the world. But it wasn't just the mornings that had changed. Yuki had quietly taken over organizing their shared space in ways that made everything feel more livable. She folded his clothes with military precision, arranging them in neat piles that somehow made his tiny closet seem bigger. She organized his scattered belongings, creating little systems that actually made sense. "Americans have so many things," she observed one evening while sorting through his collection of random cables and electronic devices. "But everything is mixed up. In Japan, we have a saying, a place for everything and everything in its place. It makes the mind peaceful when the space is organized." Jake watched her create order from chaos and realized she was right. He'd been living in constant low-level stress, always looking for things, always feeling like his space was working against him instead of for him. Now his apartment felt like a home instead of just a place where he stored his stuff. The most surprising change was their evening routine. Every night, Yuki insisted they needed to prepare the sleeping space together. This involved folding back the covers on Jake's bed while she arranged her futon, dimming the lights to a soft glow, and sometimes lighting a small candle that smelled like cherry blossoms. "Sleeping space is sacred," she explained seriously. "It's where we rest our bodies and minds. It should be treated with respect and prepared with intention." Jake had never thought about his bedroom as anything more than the place where he collapsed at the end of each day. But watching Yuki treat their shared space like something special made him see it differently. There was something calming about the ritual, something that helped him transition from the stress of work to the peace of rest. The cultural misunderstandings were constant but entertaining. Yuki was convinced that all Americans ate cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because she'd seen it in movies and commercials. She approached Jake's lifestyle with scientific curiosity, taking notes in a small leather journal about what she called American customs. "Why do Americans have so many shoes?" she asked one day, staring at his collection of sneakers, work, boots, and dress shoes. "In my village, we have shoes for inside, shoes for outside, and shoes for special occasions. But you have shoes for running, shoes for walking, shoes for different types of walking. It's very complicated." Jake tried to explain the concept of athletic shoes, casual shoes, and formal shoes, but he could see the confusion in her eyes. To her, it probably seemed like Americans had overcomplicated something as simple as putting protection on their feet. She was equally puzzled by his eating habits. "You eat food from boxes and cans," she noted, not judgmentally, just as an observation. "In Japan, we believe fresh food has more life energy. But maybe American food is designed to give energy in different ways." Jake realized he'd been living on processed convenience foods for so long that he'd forgotten what fresh meals tasted like. When Yuki offered to cook for both of them, using simple ingredients she'd found at the local market, he discovered flavors he didn't know existed. Her cooking wasn't fancy or complicated, but everything tasted clean and alive in a way that made his usual frozen dinners seem like cardboard. But the biggest change was in their conversations. Jake had gotten used to coming home to silence, spending his evenings watching television or scrolling through his phone until he fell asleep. Now he found himself looking forward to talking with Yuki about their days. She asked him questions about his work that no one had ever asked before. Not just how was work, but what did you learn today? And did anything make you proud of yourself? She listened to his answers with genuine interest, nodding thoughtfully and asking follow-up questions that showed she was really paying attention. In return, she shared stories about her village, her family, and her dreams for the future. She told him about her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died, and who had taught her that every person she met was an opportunity to learn something new about the world. "My grandmother always said that home is not a place," Yuki told him one evening as they sat in their peaceful, organized space. "Home is the feeling of being safe and understood." I think maybe she was right. Jake looked around their small apartment, at the neat piles of clothes, the carefully arranged teacups, the soft glow of the evening light, and realized that for the first time in years, he felt like he was truly home. By the second month, something had shifted between Jake and Yuki that neither of them wanted to name out loud. What had started as Yuki's innocent misunderstanding about American customs had become something much deeper and more meaningful. Jake found himself sleeping better than he had in years, not just because of Yuki's calming presence, but because he no longer felt alone in the world. Their morning tea ritual had expanded into longer conversations about everything and nothing. Yuki would tell him about her dreams, which were always vivid and full of symbols that she tried to interpret. Jake found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone: his worries about his future, his fears about being stuck in a job that didn't fulfill him, his dream of maybe starting his own business someday. "In Japan, we have a concept called ikigai," Yuki explained one morning as they sat with their steaming cups. "It means a reason for being. It's the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for." "Have you found your ikigai?" Jake had never heard the word before, but something about it resonated with him. He'd been so focused on just surviving, just paying bills and getting through each day, that he'd forgotten to think about what actually gave his life meaning. Their evenings had become even more precious to him. After dinner, they would sit together in their carefully arranged space, sometimes reading quietly, sometimes talking about their days. Yuki was learning English faster than anyone expected, but she still maintained her belief that sharing sleeping space was the American way of showing deep trust between people. Jake had started to suspect that she knew better by now. Her English was good enough that she could have easily looked up American living customs online or asked other international students. But every night, she still carefully arranged her futon next to his bed, and every night, Jake felt grateful that she did. The truth was, he had started looking forward to the sound of her breathing. In the quiet darkness, the soft rustle of her blankets when she turned over, the gentle humming of traditional songs that she sometimes did before falling asleep. These sounds had become his lullaby, more effective than any sleep aid he'd ever tried. The turning point came on a Thursday morning when Jake woke up feeling terrible. His head was pounding, his throat was raw, and every muscle in his body ached. He tried to get up for work, but the room spun around him, and he collapsed back onto his bed with a groan. Yuki was at his side immediately, pressing her cool hand against his forehead with a look of serious concern. "You have fever," she announced. "You cannot go to work today. I will take care of you." Jake tried to protest. He couldn't afford to miss work, and he didn't want to burden Yuki with his problems. But she was already moving with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything else, gathering supplies and making plans. She called his workplace for him, explaining in her careful English that Jake was very sick and would not be coming in. She walked to the pharmacy and came back with medicines, throat lozenges, and ingredients for what she called healing soup. She set up a system for monitoring his temperature and making sure he stayed hydrated. But what touched Jake most was how naturally she cared for him. She didn't act like it was a burden or an inconvenience. She moved through his apartment like a gentle, determined nurse, checking on him every hour, bringing him small cups of different healing teas, and adjusting his blankets when he got chills. "You don't have to do all this," Jake croaked when she brought him a bowl of homemade soup that smelled like heaven. "You might get sick too." Yuki sat down beside his bed and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "When people share sleeping space, they share everything," she said quietly. "Joy, sadness, sickness, health. This is not just American custom. This is human custom everywhere in the world. We take care of each other because that's what makes us human." That night, Jake's fever spiked, and he found himself shivering uncontrollably despite being covered in blankets. Without hesitation, Yuki moved her futon right next to his bed and stayed awake all night, checking his breathing, bringing him water when he needed it, and placing cool cloths on his forehead when the fever got too high. "Sleep," she whispered. When he tried to apologize for keeping her awake, "I'm here. You're safe." Those words hit Jake harder than he expected. When was the last time someone had told him he was safe? When was the last time someone had stayed awake all night just to make sure he was okay? He realized that somewhere along the way, Yuki had stopped being his temporary roommate and had become something much more important. As he drifted in and out of fevered sleep, Jake found himself thinking about how empty his life had been before. She arrived, he'd been surviving, but not really living. He'd been going through the motions of being a person without actually connecting with anyone or anything that mattered. Now he had someone who made him tea every morning, who organized his chaos into peace, who asked him real questions about his dreams and fears, someone who stayed awake all night when he was sick, who treated their shared space like something sacred, who had somehow made his tiny apartment feel like the home he'd never known he was looking for. By the third day, Jake was feeling better, but he didn't want to admit it. He wanted to stay in this bubble where Yuki took care of him, where her attention was focused entirely on his well-being, where the outside world couldn't intrude on the safe space they created together. But as he watched her carefully preparing his medicine and arranging fresh flowers she'd bought to bring healing energy to the room, Jake realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was falling in love with her, and he had no idea what to do about it. Jake's world came crashing down on a sunny Tuesday morning. When Yuki received an official-looking envelope in the mail, she opened it carefully, as she did everything, and her face lit up with excitement as she read the contents. "Jake-san," she called from the kitchen, her voice filled with joy. My university application has been accepted. I will start classes in the fall semester. Jake's heart sank, but he forced himself to smile as she showed him the acceptance letter. The university was 3 states away, a prestigious school with an excellent international program. It was everything Yuki had worked toward, everything she deserved. And it meant she would be leaving in 6 weeks. That's amazing, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. You must be so proud. Yuki nodded enthusiastically, pulling out her laptop to show him pictures of the campus. Look at the library, she said, pointing to a beautiful building surrounded by green lawns. And the dormitories where international students live. They have roommates from all over the world. I will learn so many new customs and traditions. As Yuki excitedly talked about her future, Jake felt like he was watching their peaceful world dissolve before his eyes. She showed him course catalogs, talked about professors she hoped to study with, and began making lists of things she needed to prepare before leaving. Each detail felt like another step away from the life they built together. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, the sleeping arrangement felt awkward again. Jake lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Yuki breathe softly on her futon nearby. But instead of the comfort he usually felt, all he could think about was how temporary this all was. In 6 weeks, she would be gone, and he would be back to coming home to silence and eating dinner alone. The next few weeks passed in a strange mix of normal routine and underlying tension. They still had their morning tea rituals, still organized their space together each evening, still talked about their days. But something had changed. Yuki spent more time on video calls with her family back in Japan, speaking rapidly in her native language with an excitement Jake couldn't understand. She started making preparations for her departure, researching the climate in her new city, ordering textbooks online, and slowly organizing her few belongings. Each small action felt like another reminder to Jake that she was already mentally moving on to the next chapter of her life. Jake found himself pulling back emotionally, trying to protect himself from the inevitable pain of her leaving. He started working longer hours at the electronics store, volunteering for extra shifts that would keep him busy and distracted. When he came home late, Yuki would still have tea waiting for him, but their conversations became shorter, less intimate. One evening, Yuki was sitting at their small table with her laptop, filling out housing forms for the university dormitory. She looked up when Jake walked in from work, and he could see concern in her eyes. You have been very quiet lately, she said gently. Are you unhappy about something? Jake wanted to tell her everything, how much he would miss her, how empty the apartment would feel without her presence, how he'd grown to depend on their shared routines more than he'd realized. But instead, he just shrugged and said, just tired from work. The breaking point came when Jake's older brother visited unexpectedly one Saturday afternoon. Jake had forgotten he was coming until he heard the knock on the door. When he opened it, his brother stepped inside and immediately noticed Yuki's futon neatly folded beside Jake's bed. What's this setup? His brother asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you two sleeping in the same room? Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment. Suddenly, seeing the arrangement through his brother's eyes, it seemed strange and inappropriate. All the comfort and peace he found in sharing space with Yuki now felt like something he needed to defend or explain. It's not what you think, Jake said quickly. She's just staying here temporarily. It's a cultural thing. His brother looked skeptical. Dude, this is weird. You're basically living like you're married or something. What happens when you want to bring someone home? What happens when she wants privacy? This whole situation is just not normal. After his brother left, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he was right. Maybe they had created something that existed outside the normal boundaries of roommate relationships. Maybe it was time to start preparing for the reality that Yuki would soon be living with regular roommates who wouldn't share sleeping spaces or morning tea rituals. That night, Jake made a decision that he immediately regretted. Yuki, he said, as she began arranging her futon for the evening, maybe you should start sleeping on the couch. You know, to get used to having your own space before you go to university. Your roommates there probably won't understand the shared sleeping custom." The look on Yuki's face was like a physical blow. Her expression shifted from confusion to hurt to a kind of resigned sadness that made Jake's chest ache. "Of course," she said quietly, her voice carefully controlled. "You are right. I should practice American individual sleeping customs." She gathered her futon and pillow without another word and moved to the living room. Jake wanted to take back what he'd said, wanted to tell her to stay, wanted to explain that he was just scared of getting too attached to something that was ending soon. But instead, he just watched her go. That night, Jake lay in his suddenly too large bed, missing everything about having Yuki nearby. The room felt cold and empty without her presence. He missed the sound of her quiet breathing, the soft rustle of her blankets, the peaceful energy she brought to their shared space. On her couch in the living room, Yuki lay awake too, staring at the ceiling and wondering when everything had started to feel so complicated and sad. The final 3 weeks of Yuki's stay passed like a slow, painful countdown. Jake and Yuki maintained the surface of their old routines: morning tea, evening conversations, shared meals, but the easy comfort between them had been replaced by careful politeness. They moved around each other like strangers trying not to intrude, when just weeks before they had moved together like dancers who knew each other's steps by heart. Jake's apartment felt wrong now. The living room couch, where Yuki had been sleeping since their awkward conversation, seemed to mock the organized harmony they had once shared. Every morning, Jake would find her futon neatly folded and tucked away, as if she was trying to take up as little space as possible. The sight of it made his chest tight with regret. Yuki threw herself into preparations for her departure with an energy that felt forced. She researched everything about her new city, the best places to buy groceries, the public transportation system, the weather patterns throughout the school year. She ordered winter clothes online, practiced conversations she might have with her future roommates, and video call with other international students who would be attending the same university. They seemed very nice, she told Jake one evening after a long call with her future dorm mates. "There's a girl from Brazil who loves cooking, and a boy from Germany who plays guitar. We will all learn from each other." Jake nodded and made appropriate responses, but inside he felt like he was being replaced before she'd even left. These new people would get to experience Yuki's morning energy, her thoughtful observations about the world, her way of making any space feel like home. They would be her new adventure, while Jake would become just a memory of her time learning about American customs. The worst part was that Yuki seemed genuinely excited about her future. She talked about her classes, her professors, her plans to join clubs and explore new opportunities. Jake wanted to be happy for her, but all he could think about was how empty his life would feel without her presence. 3 days before her scheduled departure, Jake came home from work to find the apartment eerily quiet. He called out for Yuki but got no response. After checking the bedroom and kitchen, he finally found her sitting on the fire escape outside their window, looking out at the city lights that were just beginning to twinkle in the evening dusk. "Hey," he said softly, climbing out to sit beside her on the narrow metal platform. "Everything okay?" Yuki didn't look at him immediately. Instead, she continued staring out at the urban landscape, her expression thoughtful and sad. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. "I have something to tell you," she said. "Something I should have said weeks ago, but I was afraid." Jake's heart started beating faster. "What is it?" Yuki took a deep breath and turned to face him. "I know that sharing a bed is not American custom," she said, her words careful and deliberate. "I learned this after only 2 weeks of living here. I read about American living arrangements online. I talked to other international students. I knew that roommates in America usually have separate bedrooms, and when they don't, they create privacy barriers." Jake stared at her, processing what she'd just admitted. "You knew?" "Yes," Yuki said, looking down at her hands. "But I was scared to sleep alone in a new country, with new sounds and new smells and everything so different from home. And you seemed lonely too, like maybe you needed company as much as I did. So I thought, maybe we could help each other, even if it wasn't the traditional American way. Jake felt a mix of emotions washing over him: surprise, relief, and something that might have been gratitude. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it was working," Yuki replied. Finally meeting his eyes again, we were both sleeping better, both feeling less alone in the world. We created something peaceful and good together. Why ruin that with too much truth about customs and traditions? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching cars move through the streets below like streams of light. Jake realized that he'd been so focused on the deception that he missed the deeper truth. Yuki had created their shared arrangement not to trick him, but to comfort both of them. "I'm going to miss this," Jake said quietly. "I'm going to miss you." "I will miss you too," Yuki said, "more than I expected when I first came here. You taught me that kindness doesn't need to follow rules or customs. Sometimes the best human connections happen when people just care for each other, even if it doesn't fit normal patterns." Jake looked at her profile in the soft evening light and made a decision that surprised them both. "What if you didn't go?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yuki turned to stare at him. "What do you mean?" "What if you stayed here and went to the community college instead? They have good programs, and you could transfer to a university later if you wanted. We could figure out what this is between us, without pretending it's about American customs or cultural exchange. Just to people who found something good together." Yuki's eyes widened, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. Jake could see her thinking, weighing possibilities, considering a future she hadn't imagined. "You would want that?" she asked finally. "Even though I wasn't completely honest about the sleeping arrangement? Even though I created this situation based on a lie?" "You didn't lie," Jake said, realizing the truth as he spoke it. "You created something beautiful from a difficult situation. You made both of our lives better. That's not deception. That's just what people do when they care about each other." Yuki smiled then, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her in weeks. "My grandmother always said that the best homes are built, not from tradition or rules, but from two people deciding to take care of each other." Maybe she was right. The next morning, Jake woke up to the familiar sound of Yuki preparing tea in the kitchen. But this time, her futon was back in its place beside his bed, and everything felt different, not because of customs or cultural misunderstandings, but because they had chosen each other with full honesty about who they were and what they wanted. Yuki called the university that afternoon to defer her acceptance for 1 year. They would spend that time figuring out their relationship, exploring their feelings, and building something real together, not based on American customs or Japanese traditions, but on the simple human desire to not be alone in the world. That evening, as they prepared their shared sleeping space together, Jake realized that sometimes the best things in life happen when you stop trying to follow all the rules and just follow your heart instead.